Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a half eternity band like the one you're seeing here in Rhino. We'll start off by creating a new file and we'll use the small objects millimeters template. Please make sure that you have your snaps set up like I do, and make sure that you have project turned on, and also make sure that OSnaps, gumball, and record history are on as well. Now we could use this jewelry kit that I make over here to help us with this ring, but in this video we're just going to use plain Rhino. We will not be using the kit in this video. However, I will leave a link to the free version of the kit in the description below the video. The first thing we will want to do is create the sizing circle, and we'll need to do that in the front viewport. And so we'll go to the Curve Tools tab and grab the Circle tool, and we'll set the center of the circle in the center of the world. And then we'll give it a diameter of 17.32. And now I'm just going to zoom in on the sizing circle a little bit and then select it and grab the curve seam tool and move the curve seam down to the bottom quad of the sizing circle and then press enter to exit that command. Now the reason that we want to move the curve seam down to the bottom of the sizing circle is because ultimately that's going to become a seam in our surfaces, or at least some of our surfaces. And seams can cause issues with fillets and other problems. And so because the bottom of a ring is typically a very plain place with no details, that is a place where a seam in the surfaces is least likely to cause any issues. Now, that doesn't mean that every ring should have its curve seam down at the bottom, but almost every ring should. And this ring definitely needs to have its curve seam down at the bottom of the sizing circle. So go ahead and do that for this project. And now we need to import a gemstone model into the Rhino document. And I offer one for free over at Patreon. All you have to do is click on the Download All button and then click Save. I also offer one over at Gumroad. Just be sure to put 0 in the price field before clicking on the I want this button. I think it will take you through a shopping cart experience, but there will be no charge. And I'll leave a link to both of these in the description below the video. After you've downloaded the gem model, go back to Rhino and click on File, Import, and then open that file. And then the gem will be in the document. Now I'm just going to go over to perspective view so we can see this a little better, and I'll switch over to shaded mode. Now this file comes with 3 different items and they are each on their own layer, and I'm going to turn those layers off and then turn them back on one at a time so you can see these items. So you have the outline, the cutter, and the gem. But the problem is that the gem is too big, so we're going to need to scale it down. Right now it's 10 millimeters across, and we only want it to be 2 millimeters across. So let's go ahead and select everything, the gem, the outline, and the cutter. And then we'll go up to the Transform tab and grab the 3D Scale tool. Now it's asking for a base point. The base point is going to be the center of the world, so we're going to type 0 and press enter for that. Now it's asking for a scale factor or a reference point, and we're not going to use reference points. We're going to type in a scale factor. And the scale factor is going to be the size that we want it to be, which is 2 millimeters, divided by the size that it currently is, which is 10 millimeters. So we're going to type 2 divided by 10 in the command line and hit enter. And now the gem is the correct size. Now we just need to position the gem, and to do that, let's go into the front viewport. And then we'll just select the gem, the outline, and the cutter and lift it up until the culet or bottom point of the gem touches the top of the sizing circle. And from there, we'll lift it up another 0.6 millimeters. The next thing we need to do is find out where the gem to the left of this gem would be located. And to help us with that, we're going to draw a line from the center of the world to the lower edge of the girdle of this gemstone. And then we're going to offset that line by the distance that we want between the 2 gemstones. So I want 0.2 millimeters of distance between the gemstones, so I'm going to offset the line by that much. Now, let's grab the gemstone and go to the Transform tab and get the Rotate tool. And let's make sure that copy equals yes up in the command line. And let's set the center of rotation at the center of the world. We'll do that by typing 0 and pressing enter. Now it's asking for an angle or a first reference point. And this time we're going to use reference points. And our first reference point is going to be the bottom right corner of the girdle right here. And then the second reference point is going to be the end of this line right here. Now we could keep making copies, but we are done. We only needed this one. And so we're going to hit enter to exit the rotate command. And then we can delete these two lines. We don't need them anymore. Now I'm going to snap a point here to the bottom of this diamond, and that's something that we'll use later on. Now we're going to snap a line from the bottom of this diamond to the bottom of this diamond. We're going to make another line that goes from the center of the world to the midpoint of this line. Once we snap to the midpoint of this line, we're going to press Tab on the keyboard, and then we'll be able to continue extending this line on up until it's a little past the top of the center gem here, like this. Now we can delete this line, and we'll take this one and mirror it across the y-axis here in the front viewport. And now we have the boundaries of our under bezel. Now we can start working on creating the bezel itself. And we'll start off by going into the top viewport and selecting the gem's outline. And then we'll offset that by 0.1 millimeters. And we'll turn off that outline so that we don't accidentally select it in the future. We'll go back into the front view and make a copy of that top outline. And then we'll drag that copy down until it's about halfway between the girdle of the gemstone and the top of the sizing circle. We'll make a copy of that outline and drag it down until it's just inside the sizing circle like this. Now we'll scale this bottom line until it touches those two boundary lines that we made earlier. And then we'll do the same thing to the middle line as well. Then we'll select all three of these outlines and stretch them horizontally until the edges touch the other stone like this. And we're doing this because we want the bezels to overlap each other a little bit. While these three outlines are selected, we'll go ahead and loft them. Make sure that the loft style is set to normal. After lofting the three outlines, select only the middle one and stretch it just a little bit in this direction just to give a slight curvature to the under bezel. And let's just switch over to perspective view and take a look at it for a moment, and then back to front view. And all right, we've got the outer surface of the under bezel done. Now we want a hole that runs through the center of the under bezel, and we're going to make that hole with a pipe. And to make the pipe, we're going to need a line. So we're going to grab the line tool, and we'll start the line at the center of the world, and then we'll end the line right here above the gemstone. We want to lock it into a perfectly vertical position, so we're going to hold down Shift while we pull up and click. Now we'll pipe that line with a pipe that has a diameter of 0.5 millimeters. And I'm going to put that pipe on the red layer. Now the reason we're making this pipe 0.5 millimeters in diameter is because it is making a hole in our model. And when you're dealing with jewelry, anytime that you have a hole or opening in the jewelry model, it's recommended that that be at least 0.4 millimeters in size. So I went a little beyond that at 0.5 millimeters. Now it's also a general recommendation that any structurally important part of your jewelry be at least 0.8 millimeters in thickness. Now it's not always possible to obey that rule, but I try to do it whenever I can, and we're going to do that in this ring. So we don't want any part of this bezel, under bezel wall being less than 0.8 millimeters in thickness. We could probably get away with 0.75 or 0.7, but it looks like we'll be able to obey this rule in this project, so we're going to. And to help us with that, we're going to offset this pipe. We're going to use offset surface to offset this pipe by 0.8 millimeters. And that essentially is going to make a larger pipe. And I'm going to put that on the red layer as well. And this is just a guide. We don't want any part of our under bezel going inside of this larger pipe. And that way we know that all parts of the under bezel, once we cut that hole through the middle with the smaller pipe, will be at least 0.8 millimeters in thickness. Now we actually only care about the part of this large pipe that is outside the sizing circle. So we're going to extrude that sizing circle out, and then we're going to subtract that big cylinder away from this large pipe. And this is the part that we're going to use as a guide to make sure that no part of our under bezel goes inside of this large pipe here. Now if we zoom in real close here, we can see that the bottom part of our under bezel does go through into the inside of that guide pipe that we made. So I'm going to scale the bottom outline curve out just a little bit in this direction to correct that. Now we're going to switch over to the right viewport and zoom in on that under bezel. Right now, the sides of the under bezel are perfectly vertical. And that's definitely a valid design choice, but in this project I would like to add a little bit of curvature to the under bezel from this view as well. And I've already got that bottom outline highlighted or selected, so I'm just going to scale it in this direction a little bit, making sure that we don't cause the under bezel to go inside of that guide pipe. This does add a little bit of curvature, and this actually is fine, but I want a little bit more, so we can't make this one any smaller because it'll cause the under bezel to go inside of that guide pipe. So I'm going to grab the middle outline and scale it out a little bit in this direction just to add a little bit more curvature. So I think we have the outer surface of the under bezel shaped like we want, and we no longer need this guide pipe that we made earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Now I'm going to switch over to the perspective view and cap the under bezel. So that's going to make the under bezel become a solid object, but it's also going to break history. So once we cap it, we can no longer change the shape of the under bezel with those three outlines like we were doing earlier. Now that it's a solid object, I'm going to use boolean difference and subtract that thin pipe out of the center of it. And then I'll turn the red layer off so that we can more easily see the opening that results from subtracting it. Now when you have something like a hole, like this azure or pilot hole in your jewelry model, the general rule of thumb is that it should never be more than twice as tall as it is wide. So this opening is 0.5 millimeters wide, so it shouldn't be more than 1 millimeter tall. But it's only going to go up to where it touches the gemstone, because we're going to be cutting away the shape of the gemstone. So let's just measure that real quick and make sure that the distance from here to here isn't more than 1 millimeter. And it looks like it's just a little above 0.8 millimeters, so that's fine. Now the reason that this matters is because this opening is going to be a column of plaster while the model is in the plaster mold phase. So we're going to 3D print it. We're going to put that 3D print into a flask and fill the flask up with plaster, and then we're going to melt the 3D print out of the flask. We'll be left with an opening where the ring will be. And so we'll have the inverse of our model basically. And so what will be a hole in the ring will actually be plaster in the flask. So while this will be a hole in the ring, it's going to be a column of plaster in the flask. And while the molten metal is pouring through this, through the mold, it could actually break this little column of plaster if it's not strong enough. So that's why it needs to be no more than 2 times as tall as it is wide. But it looks like we're good in this situation. Now, before moving on with the modeling process, I want to do a little bit of organizing here. I want to get all of the different objects on their own layers. So for instance, I want all of the curves on their own layer. So I'm going to select these 3 lines here and the sizing circle and the 3 outlines that make up the under bezel and put them on the blue layer. And I'll rename the blue layer Curves. And then I will select the under bezel and put it on the green layer. And I should have called the green layer under bezels, but I accidentally called it bezels. And then I'm going to select this little point, and we will put that on the white layer, which I will rename points. Now I want to make a line that will be a base for our prong. And I want that line to be level with the top of our center gem here. So the first thing I want to do is grab the line tool and snap the start of the line here at the top corner of the gem. I'm going to hold down Shift and pull out to the left to make a nice straight line. And this is just going to be a guide for our actual prong line. And then we'll grab the line tool again and we'll get a little intersect snap right here for the start of that line. And then we'll come down here and get a near snap and just snap to this blue guideline that we've got. And we just want the end of the prong line to be a little bit underneath the under bezel. And then we'll turn off the blue layer with the curves, and we can delete this little guideline up here. And this line is going to be the base for our prong. So we'll select this line and go to Solid Tools and grab the Pipe tool. Now make sure that you get the Pipe tool that has the rounded caps. And we're going to give this prong a diameter of 0.85 millimeters. Now how thick you make the prongs is really a design choice. But in this project, we're going to go with 0.85 millimeters. Now, as a general rule, you want the top of the prong, the base of where the sphere, the half sphere starts here, or the rounded cap of the prong, you want that to be level with the gemstone. And since we made the top of our line level with the top of the gemstone, that is already the case. Now, how tall the prongs are, that is really going to be down to the preference of the jeweler who's going to be setting the gemstones. So some jewelers may like it a little taller than this. Some may like it a little shorter. If you want to adjust the height of the prong, just select the line, hold down the Shift key and scale it up or down a little bit to make it as tall or short as you want. But again, the general rule is that you have the top of the gem level with the base of that half sphere cap on top of the prong. And so that's what we're going to do in this project. Now with this line, the center line of the prong still selected, we're going to go into the perspective view and we're going to move that line out this way until the prong just kisses the gemstones. And then we're going to calculate the amount of overlap that we want. So that can also vary by the preference of the jeweler, but typically you're going to overlap your prongs between, say, 15% to maybe 25% of the prong's width. So I'm going to pull up a calculator, and we're going to get 20% of the prong's width. So we're going to type in 0.85 times 0.2. And you can see that's 0.17. So we're just going to move the prong back in toward the gemstones by 0.17. Now that's not exactly the amount of overlap because we're not going toward the center of the stone, we're going toward the center of the area between two stones, but it should get us pretty close to a 20% overlap. Now we're going to rebuild this line so that it has 4 control points. And so make sure that the point count is 4 and the degree should be 3, which it should be by default, but just make sure. Then we're going to come up here and turn on the curves control points. And then we're going to go into the right viewport and we're going to grab this bottom point and pull it in so that the prong matches the curvature of the bezel. Only move the bottom point because we want the top of the prong to stay straight. Then I'm going to put the prong on the purple layer. And we'll rename that layer prongs. Now we need to trim the bottom of the prong with the sizing circle. So I'll turn the curves layer back on and I'll extrude the sizing circle out like this. And then we'll use boolean difference to subtract that cylinder from the bottom of the prong. And now I'm just going to add a small 0.1 fillet to the bottom of the prong. Alright, it's finished, and so I'll mirror it across the x-axis. And we'll group these two prongs together with Control G. And now our prongs are done. Alright, I think we're ready to start replicating the bezel and the gem and the prong down the side of the ring. We don't need this gem anymore, so we can delete that. I'm going to turn the curves layer off so I can easily select the line that we use as the base for the prong, and then I'm going to move it to the curves layer because we also don't need that. However, don't delete that curve because we will need it later when we want to make a render version of this ring, which we won't do in this video, but we will probably do in a future video. Now we're going to select everything that's left over on the screen, including the little point right there. I will need to be able to see the sizing circle, so we'll turn the curves layer back on. And then I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see almost half of the sizing circle. Now we'll grab the rotate tool and make sure that copy equals yes up in the command line. And we'll set the center of rotation at the center of the world. And our first reference point is going to be the bottom point of the gemstone. You should get an end snap here. And then our second reference point is going to be this point right here. Be sure you get a point snap here. And this is going to create a copy of everything, including the point. And we'll actually use the new point as our next reference point. And we'll keep doing that until we are halfway around the circle. Be sure to get a point snap at each point. And it looks like this is a little too far, so I won't make this copy, and I'll hit enter to exit the rotate command. Once we have all of these gems going down to the midway point on the circle, we need to mirror everything except for the top center gem and its under bezel over to the other side. To make it easier to select everything, I'm going to turn the curves layer off and the points layer off. And then I'm going to draw a selection box around everything here on the left. Everything except that top center gem and its under bezel. And then we'll mirror that across the y-axis. Now that's the y-axis while we're in the front viewport. Just to make things more convenient in future operations, I'm going to group all of these things together. So I'm going to select all of the prongs and then group them together. And then I'm going to select all of the cutters and group them together. And then I'm going to select all of the gems and group them together. So let's turn the curves layer back on and then zoom in on the top center gem. What we want is to trim the under bezels so that they're even with the sizing circle, and also so that they are a little bit below the girdles of the gemstones. So let's select the sizing circle and then go up to Curve Tools and grab the Offset Curve tool. And let's use the Through Point option. And we'll snap here to the bottom center of the girdle. Then we'll offset that line to the inside by 1/10 of a millimeter. And then we can delete that first offset that we made. And let's put this line on the blue curves layer as well. So now we have a line that is just a little bit under the girdles of the gemstones. Now we need to trim the under bezels with the sizing circle and that outline that we just made. So let's select the under bezels and then the sizing circle and that outline that we just made. And let's go to the visibility tab and click on the isolate tool and then click off to deselect everything. And this way we only have the under bezels and these two outlines on the screen. Now we'll select the two outlines and go to the perspective view, go to the solid tools tab and grab the extrude tool and extrude this shape out like this. Then we'll select the bezels again, choose boolean intersect, and then click on this shape here and hit enter. And that's going to weld all of these together and also trim them by that other shape, which will make them level with the sizing circle and that outer outline. All we need to do to the under bezels now is add the fillets. So adding the fillets here is not 100% necessary, but fillets do help with the renders, with 3D printing, and with casting. So I like to add them whenever I can. So let's grab the fillet tool and we'll set the radius to 0.15 millimeters, and then we'll select the entire set of under bezels here and hit enter a couple of times and then wait for the fillets to process. Alright, and now we're done with the under bezels. Okay, let's go to visibility and click on show to bring everything back. And let's turn the gems layer off and then select the under bezels and also the prongs. Let's go up to solid tools and grab the boolean difference tool and make sure that delete input is set to yes and that delete cutters is set to no. And then select the cutters and hit enter. And then we'll just wait for that to process. And if we turn the cutters off, you can see that we've cut the seats in the under bezels and also the notches in the prongs. Alright, and then we'll bring the gems back and we are done with the upper half of the ring. The next thing we want to do is create the shank. So let's go to the front viewport and zoom out a bit, and then let's go up to the curve tools and grab the offset tool, and we'll use the through point option. And then select the sizing circle and snap to the top center of one of the gems like this. And then we'll put that line on the curves layer as well. Now we want to cut our shank off here about level with the prong. So let's draw a line that goes across the top of the prong there. And we'll put that line on the curves layer. And then we'll go to transform and mirror that line across the y-axis like this. Now let's select those two lines, the sizing circle and that outer outline, and then go to curve tools and grab the curve boolean tool and then just click in this area here and press enter. And now we'll have the shape of our shank, which we'll also put on the curves layer. Now while that's still selected, let's go into the right viewport and maybe zoom out a little bit if we need to. And let's go to the solid tools tab and grab the extrude tool, and we'll just snap that to the side of our under bezel. Alright, and if we go back to perspective, you can see that we've got our shank roughed in. Now I want to put some small fillets on the inside of the shank. So we're going to go up and grab the fillet tool, and we'll set the radius to 0.2, and we'll click on this edge and hit enter a couple of times. Now I want to put some large fillets on the outside of the shank. So we'll grab the fillet tool again and set the radius to 0.7 and click on this edge and hit enter a couple of times. And you can see we've got those edges rounded off quite nicely. However, the shank right here doesn't connect to the upper part of the ring very nicely, so we need to fix that now. So let's go to the front viewport and zoom in on this prong right here. I want to put a little notch behind this prong, and to help us with that, Let's grab this line and duplicate it with Control C and Control V. Drag that copy down so that it's level with the back of the prong, and then we'll offset that line by 0.4 millimeters just to make a little guide here. So we'll grab the line tool again, and we'll start this line right here where the guide line intersects the shank, and we'll end this line right here at the upper fillet of the under bezel. Then we'll grab the extend curve tool and extend this end of that line until we reach the blue guideline on the other side of the prong. And then we'll hit enter to exit the extend curve command. Then we'll select the line, hold down Shift, and scale it up a little bit so that it extends past this line and past this line by a little bit. And we'll put this line over on the blue curves layer. And then we can delete this line, and we can delete this line right here. And then let's take this line and go to the Transform tab and mirror it across the Y-axis here in the front viewport. Then we'll select the shank and split it by this line and this line. When we hit the enter key, it'll split the shank into 3 pieces, and we can zoom in and delete this little piece and come over here and delete this little piece. And so we have cut out our notches. But if we go into the perspective view, we can see that we have an open hole here. So let's select the shank and go to Solid Tools and Cap. So we've capped those 2 holes now. So I'd like to put a little fillet on the edges of the notches. So I'll go up and grab the fillet tool and set the radius to 0.2. And then I'll double click on one of the edges here. That should select the edges all the way around. Now, if you have Rhino 6, I think you'll have to click on Chain Edges up in the command line. I don't think double clicking on one edge will select all the edges all the way around in Rhino 6. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's the case. But anyway, in Rhino 7 and in Rhino 8, you should be able to just double click on one of the edges and it should go all the way around for you like this. And then we can just hit enter a couple of times and it'll put that little 0.2 millimeter fillet on those edges. And then we'll go over and repeat that process over on the other side. And now our notches are filleted. However, it still isn't quite right in this area, and we're going to have to taper the shank in order to fix that. So let's go to the right viewport and select the shank, and then go to the Transform tab and grab the Cage Edit tool, and click on Bounding Box, click on World, and then click on the Z-point count and set that to 8. Hit enter a couple of times, and you'll get your control points. Select that top row of control points and scale them in about like this, right here, and then select that second row of control points and scale them in about like that. And doing this taper, we'll put a kind of a little notch or indentation between the shank and the prongs. You can hit escape a couple of times to turn your control points off, and then we'll come back out to perspective view. Just make sure that we like this shank, and if we do, we can delete that cage. So we're done with the production model of the ring. I'm just going to go ahead and turn off the blue curves layer right now. We'll just look at this one more time. So we're done with what I would consider the production model of the ring, and we should go ahead and save our work. I usually include the word production in the file name if it's the production model. And so that's what I'm going to go ahead and do in this case. But you can use whatever file naming conventions you want. Now, we wouldn't produce this ring yet. We would move on, at least where I worked, we would move on to creating the render and get the customer to approve the render. Once they approve the render, we would move on to 3D printing the ring. We would show them the 3D printed model. And if they approve that, we would move on to casting and finishing the ring, setting the gems and whatever. So my next step would be to create the render of the ring, and we would have to make some modifications to the model to do that, and we would need to create the materials. But I'm not going to cover that in this video. I will try to make a follow-up video where we go over creating the render of the ring. And then potentially after that, I might make another video where we go over preparing the ring for printing. I'm not necessarily getting into supports and things like that, but just how to create the STL file that you could send to the the 3D printer. But all right, that's it for this video. I want to thank all of you for watching and hope to see all of you in future videos.